Hello, I'm the Analyst, and I'm here to talk about Hollywood's biggest box office flops. On Friday, Disney releases their latest feature from Pixar, Cars 3, which follows the worst received Pixar films, but this one is promising to be darker and more emotional. Speaking of dark, Disney has had their fair share of dark in their animation, especially with their villains, and they had quite a bit following and in the Disney Renaissance of the 1990s, which included films such as The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. What we're talking about today came out a few years after the Disney Renaissance and didn't have the same hallmarks expected from a Disney film. This is Atlantis, The Lost Empire. Released in June 2001, this film was more of an adventure film inspired by the works of Jules Verne rather than Disney, and it lacked many of the traditional Disney archetypes, including animal sidekicks, magic, and musical numbers, while it was also surprisingly dark and violent. So, how does it compare with the rest of the Disney universe? Let's dive right in. The film opens thousands of years ago where a wave is threatening to consume all of Atlantis. Also, note what the Atlanteans are speaking. That's actually an original language the filmmakers had made from the film. They hired Mark Okrand, who also created the Klingon language, to make the Atlantean language. They put a lot of effort into something that is used rather infrequently. A lot of the time they speak English. So, yeah. As the wave gets closer, the Queen of Atlantis floats towards a light, which is used to generate a shield that blocks out the water, though not everyone gets there in time. One thing you note throughout the film is that it's perfectly willing to imply, if not downright show, death, much like the darkest of Disney moments. Zooming forward to Washington, D.C. in 1914, we meet our main protagonist, Milo Thatch, voiced by Michael J. Fox. And it's pretty overt as he basically sounds like a college-age Marty McFly, without a whole lot of range.
That, according to our friend Plato here, was... Forget your jammies, Mrs. Packard?
Anyway, he is preparing for a presentation in an attempt to get funding for a search to locate Atlantis, which his grandfather had also searched for. And also so Milo can get out of the boiler room of the museum he works at, only for the higher-ups to screw him over by rescheduling and canceling the meeting. When he attempts to force his boss to agree by threatening to resign, his boss simply lets him go. What an asshole! A despondent Milo returns home, only to find an intruder, Helga, voiced by Claudia Christian of Babylon 5 fame, who brings him to meet her employer, the eccentric Preston Whitmore, voiced by John Mahoney. Fun fact, Whitmore was originally voiced by Lloyd Bridges, who died before he could finish recording, and thus he was recast with Whitmore. Whitmore presents Milo with an artifact he had been looking for, the Shepherd's Journal, which is a collection of accounts regarding Atlantis. And he subsequently brings on Milo for his expedition, having agreed to fund an expedition to Atlantis after losing a bet with Milo's grandfather. Getting on board the submarine being used for the expedition, Milo meets many of the colorful crew members. Mechanic Audrey Ramirez, who is voiced by Jacqueline Obrador, demolition expert Vinny, voiced by Don Novello, who actually did a lot of improvisation on the film, Dr. Sweet, voiced by Phil Morris, radio operator Wilhelmina, voiced by Florence Stanley, and yes, she is smoking in a Disney film, which is something that definitely wouldn't fly nowadays. The cook, Cookie, voiced by Jim Barney, who tragically died before the film's release, and the film would be dedicated to him, and geologist Mole, voiced by Corey Burton. Oh, Mole. He is my least favorite member of the crew, by far. He's just not interesting and annoying. I think he was supposed to be the comic relief of the film, but the other characters, especially Vinny, were much better disposed at the task. Personally, I think they should have toned down his annoying traits, and then he would have been a more bearable character. And we also meet the leader of the expedition, Rourke, voiced by James Garner, along with his crew of mercenaries. As they head towards Atlantis, they are attacked by a crab-type creature known as Leviathan, which ultimately destroys the Ulysses, causing massive casualties among the crew. And only a number of them, from this I'd guess about 30 out of the 200, survive this encounter and escape the sub. The remaining crew, including the named characters, venture on in the vehicles, where Milo inadvertently shows off to Audrey by fixing one of the digger's engines, only for their advance to be slowed down by a swarm of fireflies that burns down their camp and several vehicles, stranding them in a dormant volcano. Except for Milo, who is abducted by several people in masks, one of which heals a wound he sustained with her crystal before fleeing as the crew arrives and they reach Atlantis. The one who healed Milo, known as Kita, voiced by Cree Summer, and a rather off-type role for her, as she's normally the sassy black woman, but here she gets to be a softer and badass Disney princess. Anyway, Kita confronts the group, but Milo talks her down by speaking Atlantean and soon discovers the Atlanteans can speak other languages, as their language has similar bases to other languages, such as French, Spanish, and, most importantly to Rourke, English. Kita brings Milo, Helga, and Rourke to meet her father, the king, voiced by the great Leonard Nimoy, who orders them to leave, and Rourke is able to get them one night to resupply and rest. Kita attempts to get her father to allow them to assist Atlantis, saying they're merely surviving and struggling at that too, but the king refuses, saying she'd understand once she became ruler. Rourke orders Milo to get information about Kita, and the two end up getting along, with Milo teaching her how to activate a vehicle. Rather, he helps her, and he also discovers Atlanteans can no longer read their own language. After hanging around Atlantis, Kita takes Milo to the submerged ruins of Atlantis, which had been flooded by that wave earlier, to translate some of the inscriptions. And Milo finds it's about a power source that keeps all of the Atlanteans alive, the heart of Atlantis, which Kita had seen earlier, for she was the child at the beginning of the film.
You'd think something as important would have been in the journal, but unless the missing page.
After their excursion, however, they're confronted by Rourke and the rest of the crew. And Rourke reveals he has the missing page and captures Kita when she fights off some of his mercenaries, and Rourke demands Milo help him and find the heart, or he'll kill Kita. Rourke storms the king's palace and assaults him for the location of the heart of Atlantis, for it can only be seen from the eyes of the king. Soon realizing it literally means from the eyes of the king, and realizes the heart is below them. Rourke and Helga take Milo and Kita below to get the heart, and as she is royal blood, Kita joins with the heart, much like her mother, and she tells Milo all will be well before taking a crystal form where she is placed in a chamber to be dragged back to the surface. And Rourke intends to sell the heart of Atlantis for a fortune, despite the fact it would kill everyone in Atlantis. Before Rourke leaves, Milo gets most of the crew, sans Helga and the masked mercenaries, to stay and defect, as while they've done some bad things, they're not murderers. As Milo confronts the dying king, trying to get the mini crystal to heal him. The king refuses, revealing the reason
Protection.
Atlantis had been sunk
As
was
it
that
grew, I sought to use it as a weapon of war.
against other lands, and
That's why you hid it beneath the city, to keep history from repeating itself.
that the heart of Atlantis is actually sentient.
The crystal thrives on the collective emotions of all who came before us.
Protecting them and giving them extended life. When the king dies, Sweet asks Milo what to do, and after a moment of self-doubt, decides to go after work to prevent him from bringing Kita to the surface, which would doom Atlantis. And after explaining to the others how to use the Atlantean vehicles, they go after work, only for him to have anti-air weaponry and planes to fight them off. In the battle, Vicky and Milo try to serve as distractions so Audrey and Sweet can cut through the chains holding Kita's chamber with Sweet's saw, but it doesn't cut through metal chains as it would cut through a femur. And Rourke realizes this, having Helga drop a bomb at them, forcing them to flee. For Milo then rams the balloon, causing it to lose altitude.
Lighten the load!
But then Rourke throws Helga off the balloon. As she dies, she fires a flare at the balloon as Milo and Rourke fight, causing it to crash. The window of Kita's chamber breaks, and Milo uses one of the shards to strike Rourke, causing him to turn into a crystal that is ultimately shattered, resulting in his death by the very crystal he had sought, and thus releases the chamber. However, the balloon's crash causes the volcano they are in to begin erupting, which would destroy Atlantis. Milo is able to get the chamber back to Atlantis and frees Kita, who, with the heart of Atlantis, summons the same shield as that from the beginning to protect the city from the lava, before the heart releases Kita. The surviving crew departs, each with a crystal and a hefty amount of treasure, though Milo elects to stay and help the Atlanteans rebuild their culture with Kita the new queen. The crew returns to the surface and agrees with Whitmore to cover up Atlantis in order to protect the city from people like Rourke. And Whitmore also receives his own mini crystal and a note from Milo. The film ends with the funeral of the previous king, joining the other former rulers surrounding the heart of Atlantis. And that was Atlantis: The Lost Empire, which is probably one of Disney's most underrated efforts. It's visually interesting, willing to take risks with its death and imagery, and most of the characters are interesting, or fun to watch. Emphasis on most of them, though the story is fairly messy and uneven. Overall, it's not Disney's best, but it's far from its worst. The film would be directed by Gary Trousdale and Kirk Wise, the duo that had previously directed Beauty and the Beast and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, with Don Hahn producing, who had also produced several other Disney animated films, including those directed by Trousdale and Wise. Tab Murphy, an Oscar nominee for writing Gorillas in the Mist, would write the script. And nowadays, he's writing episodes of Teen Titans Go. And Murphy would also be one of the 6 people who worked on the story, along with the 2 directors and Joss Whedon. Yes, that Joss Whedon, the Avengers director. The budget is somewhat unclear, though estimates suggest it's between 90 and 120 million, with most generally agreeing it's on the higher end, with at least another 50 million spent to market and distribute the film, with it being one of the first films to utilize the internet heavily for marketing. When Atlantis opened, it was initially given a limited release in just 2 theaters, where it averaged $164,505 a theater, which at the time was the 6th biggest per theater opening weekend average of all time, behind fellow Disney films The Lion King, Pocahontas, Toy Story 2, A Bug's Life, and Hercules. The next weekend, it would go nationwide, adding 3,009 theaters, and with decidedly mixed reviews, opened in 2nd place with 20.34 million, behind fellow adventure film and opener Lara Croft: Tomb Raider. In its second weekend of wide release, supported by a solid A cinema score from audiences, fell 38% against the arrivals of The Fast and the Furious and Dr. Dolittle 2, ultimately finishing its domestic run with 84.06 million, making it the highest grossing film in the explorer subgenre. Overseas, it made just under 102 million, led by France's 22.08 million. After theaters take their cut of the gross, Disney would be left with $84.7 million. Covering their ad spend, though, most of the budget would be left at a loss. And I know what you're thinking. This isn't as proportionately high as other films I've covered, and yes, it isn't that high. However, this still was a flop for Disney, resulting in them canceling future plans on following up on the film, including a television series that wound up becoming a direct-to-video sequel and a canceled Disneyland attraction. The estimated theatrical loss on this film is $85.3 million. Thanks for watching, press the like button, be sure to subscribe, and follow me on Twitter at Tyler the Analyst.
So, what happened to your sister?
She's 24 and no with a shot at the title next month.